Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of Universal Podcast. My name is Samuel Arman. I study psychology at Fordham University, and I'm a teacher in Brooklyn. I'm also the host of this podcast, where we combine psychology with another subject. And I'm very excited for our subject today to be hormones and nutrition. And we are with Neenet Hairapetian. Neenet, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi. I'm so excited to be here. I'm Neenet Hairapetian, like Sam mentioned. I'm a nutritionist, and the way I describe the work that I do is I basically reteach women how to eat. I primarily work with women, just based on kind of my history, my background, and I find that women have a really distorted relationship with food just based on so many different factors, which maybe we'll get into today. But that's my role. I primarily focus on women's hormones, digestion, gut health is a huge one as well, and the women's metabolism.
And much of what you're discussing, perhaps not everything, but much of what you're discussing can be applied to men as well, of course.
Yes, there's definitely lots of foundational things that can apply to men as well. We are built fundamentally differently, so there are some differences and there's nuance. But yes, a lot of what we'll talk about today can be applied to men as well.
What kind of got you into this field? What are the sort of factors that drew you into this study?
I feel like this is actually a career change for me. So I was in corporate America for 9 years before jumping in and getting my master's and my license and all of that. I feel like I've always been on some sort of health journey, whether it was actually like healthy or not. Like most women, most millennials, I grew up dieting. I started dieting in like junior high, high school, which is like very early to be dieting for literally no reason. Like most millennials as well, I was overworking. I was used to overachieving. I mean, you and I can connect on just culturally having that pressure as well. I think that's a big part of this. Um, and I did this until my Hashimoto's autoimmune diagnosis came about when I was 24. And for those who don't know, Hashimoto's is an autoimmune disease that targets the thyroid. Basically, my thyroid is attacking my body. And so the thyroid really impacts every function in the body. So the metabolism, temperature regulation, heart rate, digestion, like literally everything in the body. And so everything of mine just kind of like was off balance. And that's how this whole thing kind of started. Then I started just taking medication, like Western medicine advised me to, and kind of got really nowhere. It felt a little bit better, but didn't really get anywhere because I wasn't actually getting to the root of why this came about.
This is what the medical professionals were telling you to do, to take a this series of medications and things of this sort.
Yeah.
That was their advice, right?
Yeah, so the typical Western solution to Hashimoto's or any thyroid sluggish thyroid issue, hypothyroid issue is to take Synthroid, which is medication. It's one form of thyroid hormone. So the idea is that you're basically kind of repleting what your body is not producing enough of. And my doctor, I remember I say this story often, so forgive me if it's a repeat, but my doctor at the time when I asked him, I was 24. I was really young. I was really like scared. I was like, why do I have this? What is an autoimmune disease? My body's attacking itself. What does this even mean? And I asked him really kind of innocently, I was like, can diet and at the time I loved yoga. I said, can diet and yoga help? And he looked at me and laughed and said, if diet and yoga can help, I would have opened up a gym instead of gone to medical school. So it was definitely like, I after that I was like, okay, well, I just have to do what I'm told. I have to take this medication. There's no other way. Until I found so many other ways a couple of years later. And so that's how this whole area of interest came about for me. I started kind of nerding out on it, geeking out, reading up on all these things, good and bad. There's a lot of really terrible information online, as with any field.
With the proliferation of social media, there is a sort of decentralization of knowledge of, we'll call it maybe an understanding of how things work. And you might have sort of amateurs who are discussing things, and children or teenagers don't really know they don't really have the means to understand the lack of verifiability of who is speaking and what they're talking about. And sometimes you have these fads and trends, and obviously many of them have the potential of being dangerous. What kind of myths and uh, misconceptions have you come across? And if you can, even if it's possible, what are the sources sometimes of these misunderstandings?
There's science, quote unquote science, right? Like there's truth in terms of a scientific perspective, and at the same time, there's a lived experience. So I think understanding and just accepting that, like, okay, just because something is in a study, that study could be flawed and et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to apply to you, right? So there's that. There's the other aspect of like, well, what may work for me may not work for you, may not work for your neighbor. So this concept of bio individuality. So we're all fundamentally just built differently as well. So there's all of those like caveats, I would say. But in terms of like general myths and things with nutrition that you see online, we go through waves. So like in the 80s and 90s, it was a low fat era. Like fat was the worst. Let's have all these like alternatives to fat. Instead of using butter, use margarine. Butter is the devil. It causes heart disease and all these things. And it's like, well, we know now that it doesn't cause heart disease. Egg yolks do not cause heart disease. But that was like an era. And then now it's like this era of, there's a couple of different things going on now. It's this era of high fat and low carb, and carbs are the devil, and carbs suck, and carbs are the root of all disease. And it's like, well, I would pick that apart and ask, like, what kind of carbs are we talking about? Zucchini squash is a carb, but also McDonald's French fries are carbs. So, like, what are we really talking about? So, really kind of getting clear on if something is too big of a generalization, it's probably not accurate. Um, and then the other piece is like this plant-based trend, which like I think there's a lot of like really like big support for, and then there's a lot of like just criticism from, because plant-based is, you know, is it avoiding meat completely, avoiding animal products completely? Is it just doing like plant-based versions of things, these alternative processed versions of these things forever for the rest of your life? Or is it introducing more plants into your diet and having an extra vegetable or two in your day, and really supporting your gut, like, and increasing the amount of plants you're eating? Is it this whole vegan trend that, that's very highly controversial? Or is it, just leaning toward, let's swap out some McDonald's for, a salad here and there? So I think those are two different things. And I think anything, like you said, on social media, anything that's really like clickbait is, fear mongering, all those things, those are probably not going to just be the end all be all to all of your issues. So the approach I take with just myself, my clients, everything I teach is really comes from a balanced place. So it's never going to be that fear mongering, like, don't ever touch this, don't ever use this seed oil, don't ever do this. So definitely much more balanced.
Do you think that perhaps these miscommunications and these generalizations, do you think they're disinformation, meaning that there are organizations that benefit from such lies and sort of distortions? Or do you think it's perhaps misinformation where people will look at, for example, there's the China study by Dr. Colin Campbell, and he pointed out that in China and in India and many of these communities, there's I think the average consumption of animal protein was somewhere around 6.9 grams of animal protein per day, whereas in America it's 71 grams per day. And then that became, for many people, animal protein is bad and causes heart cancer. So do you think it's more of a disinformation, meaning that there is a very conscious, deliberate attempt to mislead people for some sort of perhaps gain in some sort of way? Or do you think it's more misinformation in that there's just people who don't understand, and sometimes you reduce something so much that you actually end up missing more than you capture? Or it could be a mixture of both.
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely would say I can speak to the second, the misinformation piece. I don't know about the disinformation. It's not my place to say, oh, there's money funded here. This is exactly what's happening. That is beyond me. And I think that's really complicated. I will say, like, anytime something is marketable and we can make money off of it, like, that's where the attention goes. But with the misinformation, I think just for that study specifically, right? Like, is it, organic grass-fed meat that we're talking about? Or is it like, again, McDonald's? I keep bashing on McDonald's today, but just to kind of prove my point, is it that kind of, meat that we're talking about, right? Where are you in relation to the people that they're looking at in these studies? Are they studying people who eat fast food every day, trans fat every day, they eat processed carbs every day? Are you there, or are you someone who's already health conscious and is eating relatively organic most of the time, really eating a balanced diet, really making sure to include animal protein, but like doing so in a way that's like, choosing better quality animal protein? Is it the animal protein, or is it the fast food? Is it the trans fat? Is it, it could be so many factors. And so it's always, that's why I said my disclaimer in the beginning, like, it's, yes, there's studies, but it doesn't necessarily apply to everybody. And I think that that's what a lot of people take advantage of, right? Like, how can I get more clicks on my post? How can I get more views on my reel?
Mm.
Let me say something really controversial and just, get everyone's attention. And I don't think it's necessarily malicious. Like, I think everybody does things with their own lens, right? Like, I work with women's hormones. I work with the women that I do and the work that I do because I have my own lived experience, which I think adds a ton of value. And same with some of these posts on social media. I think, it could be really well intentioned, but there's a fine line, I would say, with information that's, healthy, but that can become really unhealthy if taken to an extreme, right? If you're, for example, seed oils, I think vegetable seed oils, that's like the big trendy hot topic now. Avoid seed oils, like the canolas, the grape seed oil, like all those inflammatory oils.
That's the thing that's trending now.
That's a big one, yes. At least with the community that kind of I support, it can be taken a little too far, right? Like, I think part of being a human and living a human experience is going out and enjoying French fries with your friends, on a Friday night, and not having to worry about what oil that French fry was cooked in. So I think there's a fine line between like healthy information and consuming it, no pun intended, healthily, but also taking it too far. And I have personal experience with that, where when I first entered this field, I was very disordered with everything. I was like taking everything so, literally and concretely and black and white. And I think, yes, to a degree, it's good. However, it can also be taken too far and have added stress and detrimental effects that, aren't necessarily going to help anybody.
When you say black and white, would this be sort of like extreme keto or cutting out all carbs? Would that fall into that sort of like extreme health, personal revolutions, or no, this is something
Yeah,
different?
100%. Yeah, like extreme keto, like not going 1 gram over your carb allowance every single day and having that become such a like, thing that you pay so much attention to, for whatever reason, right? Taking things so literally. I think, again, the posts are well intentioned, the information is, most likely well intentioned. We can't assume that, but I want to assume the best. But I think it's how we consume the information too and how we receive it.
Why do you think whatever succeeds in the marketing succeeds in the marketing? Besides the simplicity of reducing the content to be as digestible as possible, pun intended, but rather, for women, it seems to be something along the lines of have as few carbs as possible. With men, especially bodybuilders, and especially during, or not bodybuilders, but not only bodybuilders, but people who are constantly going to the gym, they say in the summer, if you want to get toned, you need to be in a calorie deficit. You
Mhm.
need to have fewer and fewer calories, and they get very aggressive. And when I was studying specifically psychopathology, one of the things that I kept coming across was that for anorexia nervosa, it's all the symptoms of anorexia are checked off for a lot of the bodybuilders that I know, a lot of people who are constantly in the gym,
Mhm.
and they're very muscular and they seem powerful. But all of the different symptoms, including the idea that you are constantly anxious about your weight, constantly changing your life to avoid eating a particular thing. And I only laugh because of how sometimes extreme and illogical it, it,
Mhm.
it seems, and how they are not often included in this. What are your thoughts on this?
It's interesting. That's what we were just talking about, right? Like a healthy behavior taken too far, there's a fine line. There's actually a unofficial diagnosis for that. It's orthorexic behavior. It's orthorexia, which is taking a seemingly healthy behavior and a healthy habit and kind of taking it to that extreme where it then becomes unhealthy. All of what you mentioned, like being anxious or around food, constantly thinking about food, going to the gym 7 times a week, no days off completely, like being so obsessed with it. That is, it's not an official eating disorder diagnosis, but it's something that, I mean, I would say in the next few years will become official because it's getting bigger and bigger. And that's the kind of stuff that I was hinting at before with, there is a fine line between, yes, like consume information, make some healthy choices, make healthy swaps where you can, but like don't take it to that next level where it's going to become detrimental.
Orthorexia. So ortho is standard, is to standardize something or to normalize something or to straighten something. Um,
Oh, interesting. Okay.
yeah, I know that there's like orthodontist is to straighten or normalize or
Teeth.
standardize your
Mm-hmm.
teeth, for example, dentist teeth. Yeah. Uh, and then there's, of course, atypical anorexia, which is most of the anorexia symptoms minus being underweight. But underweight is also problematic because if you're, obviously muscle weighs more than fat. So if you're at such a low BMI and you're just not physically healthy, you wake up and you're tired, you get up too fast, and every time you stand up you see stars, then you're not treating yourself well. And obviously these things they compound.
Mm-hmm.
They over time you get more and more into that non-homeostasis, and
Mm-hmm.
it obviously has can have really bad circumstances, especially for some of these models who, they're not just walking down a catwalk. That's not all they're doing. They have to have an active lifestyle. When your body is in such a, what was the word you used? Like disordered.
Mm-hmm.
When your body is so disordered, I mean, you're prone to injury. Like it must be, I think, very difficult. Speaking of which,
Yeah.
this word disorder, or this phrase autoimmune disorder, is one that I know you're not the biggest fan of. Do you want to dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the term disorder is like a little bit, it can be a little triggering, and I think it is a little bit, again, I told you, like I was 24 and the doctor was like, you have an autoimmune disorder and your body's fighting against itself, and I'm like, what? Like but and I think,
That
okay,
is an overwhelming thing to hear at any age, probably, but at
yeah.
24, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, and I think perhaps like that is true to a degree. Possibly. I think what is, it's just it's the phrase, right? It's disorder, just, or disease. It sounds like this, like end all be all. You have this, have a great life. And that's literally what my doctor said to me. He's like, he literally said, you have this, you're going to be on a low dose of this medication for life. Don't worry, you're not going to have any problems getting pregnant, which that was not even a question. It was just very much like, have a great life. And now I know you have to monitor the thyroid every 3 months, 4 times a year. You have to do extensive lab work just to make sure you're not taking too much, and you're not taking too little. So it's not this simple, okay, have a great life kind of attitude that we have to look at these things with. But at the same time, it's also not this like, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Like you're not just it's not your fate, and that's not it. There's so many things that you can do. I think with any quote unquote disease, there's a genetic predisposition, but that doesn't mean anything. It just means, it's the analogy of, you have the gun, loading it. You have a loaded gun, but your decisions and your lifestyle, your nutrition choices, all these things, and that's like pulling the trigger. So yes, you have a loaded gun, but unless you actually pull the trigger, this disease will not necessarily manifest. And that's the stuff that we don't really learn.
Predisposition doesn't necessarily mean predetermination. Doesn't mean that you're automatically going to be going down that route. And even going
Absolutely
down that
not.
route,
Mm-hmm.
there's no one route for any sort of psychopathology or any pathology. There's a variety of ways in which the pathology can interact with your system.
Yeah. And I think it's that piece that's missing, right, with just doctors who are trained to provide, and they have their time and place. Absolutely. I'm not bashing on them at all in any way, shape, or form. I think the training they get is really to help you feel better, to kind of put a band-aid on whatever is going on, and not necessarily sit down with you for an hour and go deep on, okay, well, let's figure out how you got here in the first place. Like, even with any autoimmune disorder, there's potentially, there is a genetic component. There's a component with the gut and the immune barrier that resides in our gut. Stress is a huge trigger. There's certain emotional things that are tied to autoimmunity. So, as you said, it's kind of approaching it from different angles. It's not just, this is why you have this one reason, have a great life. So it's just more complicated than that. But unfortunately, I think our generation and generations that are following us are just much more interested in these things. Like, wait, why? How did I get here? And I think the generations before us weren't necessarily, interested in how we got here. It was like, okay, just give me the medication, I'll be fine. So I think it's a bigger kind of change that's going on.
I think one of the best things about social media is the knowledge that many people
Mhm.
are experiencing
Agree.
very similar experiences. Pardon for the saying the same word twice, but there's a lot of things that, for example, I thought that I had that were entirely idiosyncratic. So one example is I can click my ears. So there's the bones in your ears, and when you gulp, it clicks. So you can actually click it. And I remember just one day seeing on Instagram someone posting about it, and then
I'm like
I
doing it as you're saying,
said
as
it
you're
to my
talking
friend.
about it. I'm like practicing it.
Yeah, you can do it. Not everyone can do it though. Actually, very few people can do it. And
Okay.
then there's other things like I learned that this was through social media, but I know it started only when I started researching psychology like a decade ago, and it was on Facebook, and it was about ritualized touching. Because as a kid, I had a sort of a very minor OCD that's actually very common as a kid, but we grow out of it. Where if something touches me here, I have to touch here. So I
Mm.
had this sort of symmetrical OCD for a very at a very young age. I think I grew out of it by the time I was like maybe 6 or 7 years old, but I still remember it. And social media has helped broadcast our commonalities. Unfortunately, just like in any sort of medium, there is going to be the loudest, the most outrageous, and the most simple or the simplest that will often travel the furthest and the widest. So that I think is perhaps some of the is encapsulated in some of the caveats that you had mentioned about how this sort of information
Hmm.
or misinformation is spread. Um, when we spoke about looking good and feeling good or feeling well, what else does having a proper nutrition accomplish? What else does someone experience when their nutrition is rectified?
Yeah. I would say specifically with the population that I work with, so in my course, I have in the beginning of before we even jump into like figuring out your nutrition, I have my students look at different measures of progress that they want to use to measure their progress throughout the course. And because I think often, especially as women, we're taught, lose weight, and that's the measure of progress that like is universal and just like equals success, which is so not true. So I have like pages of different measures of progress that my students can choose from. And it's interesting because our hormones really dictate how we walk around every day. Are we kind of surviving? Are we really tired? Are we, or on the flip side, do we have all this energy, and are we kind of approaching life and just in a better mood, just kind of stable mood? We're not so like up and down. I think, there's that aspect. So energy is a big one. I think, hair, skin, and nails, having like lots of hair, that can indicate a really good metabolic function. As well as hormone balance. When you see things like hair loss, brittle nails that are just breaking, or skin kind of just goes off track out of nowhere, that's another reason to look at your hormones and your metabolism. Um, Sleep, I think that's another great one to look at when you're looking at, okay, am I making improvements or not? Most of my students wake up in the middle of the night between 2 and 4 a.m. And that, nutritionally can be tied to blood sugar imbalances, not eating enough carbs, not having, proper protein balance. So all of these things, not to get too technical right now, but just to bring it
No,
back
I
to
love
your
it. I love
point.
it so much.
Yeah, yeah.
I
But
love it so much. You can get as technical as you want, because this is, I want to learn. I think the people who are listening want to learn as well. You said waking up in the middle of the night is a sign of having you said a protein imbalance.
So if typically waking up between like 2 and 4 a.m. in the middle of the night every night, that can indicate a blood sugar imbalance. And so what happens is
Ah,
overnight, if your blood sugar dips too low, which can happen for a couple of reasons, it's your body physiologically waking you up and saying, I need some glucose. I need some energy. Let's go. And so why can this happen? This can happen if you eat dinner too early, if you don't eat enough during the day, if your blood sugar is up and down and up and down, if you're eating carbs, with not enough protein. So there's so many things that go into blood sugar balance that I think, part of my course teaches women how to really rethink this, because I think all the information out there is your blood sugar goes up if you eat carbs, blood sugar spikes up, and okay, yes, all these things spikes up. Yes, again, McDonald's french fries all day every day, absolutely, but nobody talks about the low. If you're eating too little, if you're always dieting and super kind of meticulous and hypervigilant and disordered with eating. So blood sugar is a really, really big topic, and that can impact your sleep as well.
and this is kind of correlated sort of with crash dieting too, right? When someone is on a diet or they fast, and fasting um, at times and for certain reasons. I'm not talking about religious reasons, but yes, those too. But fasting does have some positive effects. Obviously, there's the cellular autophagy, meaning I guess the recycling of the cells is very optimized when you're fasting. But there's some people who get in these massive deficits in their caloric intake, and then right when they're done with their diets, which lasts a week or weeks or a month or months, they suddenly dive into a bunch of food and they gain their weight back in a way that they did
Mm-hmm.
not intend.
Yeah.
And is that sort of kind of like a macrocosm of what you just
100,
outlined?
yeah, 100%. Fasting, I absolutely do not recommend for anybody that I work with personally. It's a very broad blanket statement I just said, but again, to your point, there's a couple of reasons fasting could be beneficial for people with certain, gut issues and autoimmune issues with digestion and things like that. But like the general population, especially women that I work with, do not need to be fasting. You technically are fasting, right? Like you have dinner at 7, you wake up, have breakfast at 7, you're still fasting every night for 12 hours. Again, it's that fine line of 12 hours versus 16, 18 hours, which is what's trending for women. Absolute no no. That especially for women. This is I think the nuance. I think men do great with it, but the female body does not, because we have hormones, we have our cycles. Our bodies really need to feel safe in order to ovulate, in order to produce progesterone and have that hormone balance. Men, different beasts with fasting. But for
And
women,
meanwhile, women are the ones more
doing it.
perhaps frequently suggest. Well, it's not just that they're doing it, right? It's that they're being told to do it, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of, a lot of patients turn to doctors for health advice, right? Like, how can I help my blood sugar? How can I lose weight? How can I, XYZ? And doctors think, okay, I read up on some studies on fasting. I think fasting is great. It works for this. Why don't you just try fasting? And it's like, it's not for everybody, especially to your point, the people who are already really health conscious, who are already probably under eating. Like literally 90% of women are walking around under eating. And so it has a really negative effect, especially if we're talking about the metabolism, hormone balance, all these things. And so I will tell you, life changing results for students who literally just incorporate either a big breakfast or even a small breakfast in a week, they're a different person. And again, my population, and these are the people that I work with, but it's definitely very much
I
misunderstood.
mean, First of all, I'm very happy you said that because I breakfast is my favorite meal of the day. I absolutely love breakfast. I go to sleep just so I can wake up to breakfast.
And so what happens if somebody
But
tells you you have to give up breakfast, right? Like immediately, if that is your favorite meal, immediately you're just like already negative 20 points, right? Like that's why it's
I'll have
important.
to.
It's important
I'd
to,
probably just
yeah.
cry.
You'd cry, but why would you want to live your life cry? Like you have to weigh the pros and the cons, right? And I think that's with everything. If I tell you, this is why everything is so gray. There's so much nuance. Ideally women, protein recommendations, and I didn't mean to cut you off. We can get back to your question, but just as another example, I recommend 25 grams of protein at least for women. Again, same with men, but women are chronically under eating protein. So at least 25 grams of protein per meal for women. If we look at how many grams of protein a typical woman is eating in a day, it's severely lower, way lower than that. And so if I were to tell you go
Is
from
this
eating
internationally or is this,
nationally in the
or is
US,
this focusing on a, okay,
yeah, yeah. And again, there's a little bit of just nuance here, right? Like it's my population, it's the type of client I work with who has certain
right.
imbalances. But most people really are under eating because of the diet mentality and all of that. So if I tell you, let's say at least you got to get 100 grams of protein a day, but somebody's only getting 40 at most, going from 40 to 100 grams of protein overnight is going to be impossible. So you have to slowly do these things. So anyways, I just wanted to add that as well because I think that's a big one.
No, again. When you go, maybe perhaps to you they're like tangents or rants, but to me it's just bulks of information, and I love it. I'm ravenous about this stuff.
Awesome.
Uh, so I guess I have a question, and this is rooted, I guess, once again in surprises and myths and things that are perhaps unexpected or maybe even counterintuitive. But is it possible? Like here's something that I think most people might not assume or might not understand until it's directly said. Can one be overweight and malnourished,
Absolutely.
or like undernourished and still overweight?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my practice is weight inclusive. I don't, focus on weight. I don't believe in being a certain weight to be healthy. There's been studies that have been done that really highlight that it's not the weight, it's the healthy behaviors that are associated with health outcomes. So that's one big piece of it. But also, just to answer your question, that particular person may not be eating the right nutrients, right? They may be eating things that are not necessarily the most nourishing. And this applies to anybody walking around, not necessarily someone who's just overweight. Even the thinnest person can be undernourished. Um, and they look great and they kind of embody health, but they still may be undernourished, it's
They
about,
look great.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's about getting the right nutrients, but also back to kind of the gut because it is so important, absorbing, like digesting properly and absorbing those nutrients. Because you could be eating all the right things, quote unquote, right things, but if you're not actually, you have really poor digestion, you have IBS, you have any type of overgrowth, you have dysbiosis, and you're not actually absorbing what you need, you could still be malnourished or undernourished. But yes,
Okay.
absolutely, you can be walking around undernourished and look any type of way.
I think what you just said about not focusing on the weight aspect is so key because it almost resonates a lot of the different points in one, a lot of the points that you've made in one, because we have we have natural differences in our weight culturally, ethnically, in terms of our age, in terms of our sex. So the weight distribution that we would have, you can't really just generalize. I mean, you can generalize it, but once again, when you reduce too much with any sort of trait of humans or any animal, you end up eventually missing more than you're capturing. But nonetheless, I think to some people that might be a bit surprising. For you, in your experience and in your learning, what sort of tip or idea or truth has surprised you specifically more than anything else?
Yeah, I would say kind of tying a couple of things we've talked about already, that whole orthorexic piece. What's deemed a healthy behavior is like glorified to a degree of like actually being detrimental. I would argue that when I entered my master's program, when I entered this field, I was highly orthorexic. I was like, oh, everybody can just eat more vegetables and lose weight and solve all their, health problems. Like it's really not that hard. But that's like not actually, first of all, that's not true. Me and you can eat, or me and another, let's just say female, same height, same everything, can eat the same and we would still look different. We would still have different health issues, knock on wood, but it's not that simple. And I think applying that lens was a lot of unlearning for me. When I did after my master's program, I had to do 1,000 hours of like supervised work under nutritionists that are already licensed. And I did mine with 3 supervisors that were focused on disordered eating disorders, kind of that population. And that was a lot of unlearning for me. It was aha moments, like to the max. Even throughout my master's program, it was very much, weight loss is a cure for PCOS. Weight loss is a cure for heart disease. Weight loss is a cure for XYZ. Weight loss, weight loss, weight loss. But it's not the weight loss. And I think we've had it so backwards the whole time. I think, especially as women, we weigh ourselves. Most of my students weigh themselves every single day, and they basically get freaked out over a 1 pound increase. They get excited over a 1 pound decrease. And it's like, it's really not that, like your weight fluctuates, right? And it's not the weight loss. You can go through really, really extreme measures to lose the weight, but are you going to be able to maintain that weight loss? Is it is it actually healthy behaviors? Are you eating, for example, more protein, putting on more muscle mass, or are you just losing water weight? Because those are 2 different things, right? So it's the healthy behaviors that actually make an impact with reversing disease, or even just avoiding disease, or feeling good. It doesn't even have to be about disease. So that, I think, for me was a very big aha, and it still is. We have a lot of bias with
Yeah.
weight.
Oh, absolutely. Like I mean, even me on the most outside uh, possible, like I see it all the time, and maybe it's because my Google search is the proper way to do a Romanian deadlift, so Instagram is hitting me with all of these people who are like, here's how you get rid of that belly fat,
Yeah.
or like, are you not getting bicep gains? And I'm looking at it, I'm like, yeah, my biceps could be bigger, I guess. Like, it's, and this is from a male lens and someone who, exercises to be strong. But I'm very cognizant that each time I see these, they impact me. And there's that natural, you look at someone who's, you know, they have 50,000 likes, and they're doing a bicep curl, and they're maybe your age and they look a little bit like you, but they're much stronger or fitter or some sort of way desirable. And then they look at the camera and they just start spewing this misinformation. And you're not you, definitely not you, but an individual, is just jotting notes like, oh, that's what I'm doing wrong. So I need to do less of this, or I need to do more of this. And it's unfortunate, of course,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also why I think people should be grateful that there are people like you, people who are experts and who, dedicate a huge portion of their life towards not only dispelling these, I will call them pathological misinformation clusters, but also in encouraging healthy behaviors, and more important than healthy behaviors, healthy thinking, healthy
Mm-hmm.
understandings.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to the relationship that you have with yourself, right? Because, and that's your world, a lot of it. And I think it's so much of it is in the mind, and having that, like, and this is a journey for everybody, right? Like being so rooted in who you are that it's like, okay, somebody's doing better bicep curls than, or they're doing bicep curls and they look a little better than me. Good for them. And not letting that like really get to you. And I think it's really hard with social media. And it's, again, I deal primarily with women, but it sounds like it's obviously a big thing in your world as well. And by the way, losing belly fat, I just wanted to add something to that, and you're going to appreciate my tangent. I would argue like most people are not, at least again, my population, are not walking around with belly fat. They're walking around with inflammation, bloat from hormone imbalances, bloat from digestive issues. And so if this is what we're dealing with, if it's not necessarily body fat, if it's bloating or inflammation, is the solution to lose weight? Is it to lose body fat? No, it's to actually get to the root of what your imbalances are and balance your body and your system. And if it is body fat, like perhaps that can come later, but that's not the root, right? And I think when everything is so weight and physical focused, physique focused, we miss the big things. I for years was like super into fitness and into that world, and I was walking around always bloated, and mine was gut issues, hormone imbalances. So I was over here doing cardio, waking up in the morning, fasted cardio 2 a days, and I was doing all these things, eating low fat to lose body fat, and it's like I wasn't getting anywhere, and it was actually making my health worse. So that I would say something else for everyone to think about.
That's so, that last part is so important. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just really want to add like 50 underlines to that, that it could also make it worse
Yeah,
because
it made mine worse.
yeah, because I mean, again, when you're not making the progress that you think you want to have, you think, what am I doing wrong? I must be failing, whatever. And some people, especially the people who uh, they really want something, they really want to make this change, they double down and triple down, and it might actually be having the antithetical effect. They might have the opposite effect,
Yeah,
and it could be again really destructive, especially if there's something else, like an underlying issue that they're completely ignoring.
yeah.
And the example you gave with the belly fat, I think, is
With
perfect.
my
Or belly fat.
belly fat, yeah. With my journey, when I was into the fitness world, I it was like right when I got like my thyroid issues. Because when I got my thyroid issues, I gained weight, and I was like, let me go to the gym, learn how to lift weights and lose weight, and I became really passionate about it. And I think it was for me at the time like really focused on weight loss, but I realized like how much I just developed a passion for it as well. I work out all the time now, and I like love it. So there's that aspect, but I think at the time, I didn't know that my thyroid was impacting all my other hormones, my female hormones, my sex hormones. And I was like not getting a period. I was spotting in between. And those are things I think, especially the fitness world, completely ignores with women. All those bodybuilders, all the physique competitors, not to generalize, I don't want to assume, you can never assume, but I don't know how many of them are actually ovulating, how many of them are getting a period, how many are actually healthy. They look really fit, but are they actually healthy? Are they really,
Mhm.
energized? Are they sleeping well? Are they, like I said, getting a period? Those are all signs of like actual health, not necessarily what you look like. So it did actually make things worse for me because I was doubling down, like I said, and then I just stopped getting a period, and it's like, why is this not something no one talk? Why is this something anybody talks about? Like, it's an important thing. It's not just like working out and killing yourself at the gym to look a certain way.
Well, again, I think this only underscores the fact that you sharing the information that you're sharing is valuable, and perhaps for many people critical. Can you perhaps let people know how they would be able to contact you, how they would be able to learn from you, where to follow, and things of that sort? Just so that the conversation between the viewer and you doesn't end right here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very active on Instagram. I'm on there every single day. And my handle is at pencil yourself in. I have a website right now, but it's under construction, so I'm not going to give that one away. But I'm really active in my DMs. So if you want to reach out, definitely follow along for all of this kind of information. But if you ever want to connect, you can always definitely DM me.
Awesome. And by the way, that website uh, status is as of late May 2023. So just so if someone's listening to this in a month from now, perhaps that might be a totally different story.
Oh
And
wow,
when they
you're
DM
you're
you, of course,
you're lighting the fire under my my ass to get my website up.
I just want to make sure that people make healthy choices, whether it is purely through their thought patterns, their um, through their relationships, through anything, through stress. And you know beside what are there's a few major large scale ideas that I've absorbed so far in my studies. One is that pathologies, especially their classifications, are very gray. They might seem like very scientific and da, 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 you've got it. but it's not at all. And there's comorbidities, meaning that these
Yep.
overlaps and all these other complications and biases that misdiagnose people, which have huge, profound effects, sometimes forever. But another thing, I guess, that has become very ingrained in me, and forgive me for sounding kind of hippy dippy about this, but that everything is connected,
Hmm.
that the the thought patterns, our stress levels, our diet, our sleep, our mood, even our vision, meaning what we're paying attention to, what we can detect, what we can miss, obvious things that we can miss, all of these things are interrelated. The the scary thing about that is that there's so many things that one could possibly work on. So your life is kind of like a blank page, which if some people get nervous looking at that and not knowing where to begin, the goodness of that is also with the blank page, that you can start in so many places and the positive effects could snowball in all different directions. So, and nutrition, I believe, in terms of psychology, is pretty grossly underrepresented in how nutrition impacts a variety of different um,
Hmm.
traits.
Yeah.
So again, thank you, of course,
Yeah.
so much for doing this, for having this discussion with me.
Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to, I guess, close off with?
No, just thank you for sharing all of that. I totally agree. Everything you do in your work as well is, I mean, it's so correlated. And so I appreciate the work that you do because it's huge. But I hope this was helpful. I mean, I really appreciate you having me on. I think it's always really nice to connect with like-minded people and just really continue to spread, like you said, good, healthy messages out there. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course, my absolute pleasure. Thank you, Neenet.
Thank you.